Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show retired Deputy Chief, USAR Task Force Leader, and board member for the SIREN Project, J.D. Madden. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from JD's journey into the fire service, progressing through the ranks, the incredible rescue at Hurricane Katrina, the importance of proactive pre-planning, Super Bowl 50, his own powerful mental health story, the healing power of psychedelics, the SIREN Project, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you J.D. Madden. Enjoy. Well, JD, I want to start by saying two things. Firstly, thank you to our mutual friend, Tim Howling, for making this introduction. And secondly, I want to welcome you onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm honored to be here. Certainly appreciate what both Tim and Angela have helped me through, and any way that I can give back to help support their efforts with SIREN Project, as well as to kind of just get some messages out there to other people that may be struggling with some mental health issues, or also just to the fire service leaders, I think, that need to hear some different perspectives of how their people could use some alternative help.
Absolutely. Well, very first question, where on planet Earth are we finding you today?
I am out in the Brentwood, California area. I actually live on Bethel Island, which is a waterfront community. So I have my own dock right outside and get to go fishing and be outside and enjoy the outdoors as much as I can.
Beautiful. Well, let's start at the very beginning of your timeline then. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Okay. Yeah, I was born in Thousand Oaks, California. My dad was a Ventura County firefighter, and my mom worked for the local hospital there doing billing. I have a sister. She's adopted from Korea. So I was 8 years old when my parents adopted my sister, who was 4 years old at the time. So non-English speaking when she arrived. So a very interesting dynamic as from being an only child for 8 years to then having an adopted sibling, one who doesn't speak English. So going through that, it was an interesting time in my life for sure. And the dynamic of having a dad in the fire service. My dad in the fire service was one of those diehards, right? You grow up you're around the fire service enough, you realize that there's those who are just diehard, everything about the service. They live it, they breathe it. I mean, if he had days off, he'd be down at the heliport wanting to ride the helicopter or be down there, right? He's just super engaged. His friends were over all the time. So growing up around that fire service culture, I think as a kid influenced me a lot as well.
Well, firstly, going back to when your sister kind of was introduced, I'm assuming you're probably old enough to be able to remember that. What was that journey like? Firstly, going from only child to having this, 4-year-old sister introduced to the family, but secondly, navigating that language challenge.
For sure. I can vividly remember the day when I knew my parents, I was involved in the discussion, obviously, that they were going to be adopting a sibling. And So they would write letters back and forth to the orphanage, to the kids. And, my sister was one of those that they would communicate back and forth with. And so I could remember that process. And then I could remember the process. I could remember the day at LAX at the airport that, she flew home. And she flew to Korea to LAX with the social worker. And I can remember her walking down the aisle off of the airplane and instantly recognizing my dad and breaking away from the social worker to get, almost like into his arms type of a thing. And I can remember just the stir of emotions that brought, right? I was nervous, I was scared, I was excited, kind of a little bit of everything, but it's also somebody I've never met before, and she took up a lot of energy. And then you go to school and people are, when she's struggling in kindergarten to speak English and you're there in, second or third grade at the time, you want to defend her too, because you know that people aren't going to treat her that well, right? So just that whole dynamic growing up was definitely something that I think influenced me. And I didn't realize it then, but a lot later in life, especially in my leadership journey in the fire service.
What was it that drove your parents to adopt, and then why Korea specifically?
They had trouble having another child. So their journey, I think, led them. They had friends who had adopted from Korea, so there was a connection there with other people that had done it. So I think that was really the primary reason.
Amazing. Well, going back to your dad, it's interesting as we sit here now, both of us on the other sides of our career, and really kind of picking apart all the beautiful things about the profession, and then some of the arguably red flags that might be a precursor to some struggles later. And one of the things that's come up a lot is that the person who, and then not referring your father to this, but as we know in the fire service, the overtime whore, the person that any opportunity to stay at the fire station they do, and that work-life balance, and be able to switch it off when you leave and be father, mother, whatever it is, and leave the fire service behind for, a day or two, I think is very healthy. And yet we do have men and women that are so all in that not only is it taken away time from the family, but at the end of their career, that transition becomes, horrendous for them, because that's who they were, which is not, it's what we do. It's not who we are. When you reflect back now, what was that element with your father? Was it purely just a passion, or did it have a detrimental impact on, the ability to be present in the household when he was there all the time?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about that a lot. And it definitely shaped who I was and how I approached my career, because my dad was gone a lot, right? He was gone a lot. He did coach when he could. I can remember him being part of an all-star team coaching and some of the baseball teams, but I can remember most of my fun time was spent with my mom. And my mom's the one who took me fishing. She was the one who took me to do those things. And that was because my dad did work so much. And then the other impactful moment for me, or remembering, was when I decided that I was going to go and pursue a career in the fire service. I'd gone to Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, to play baseball, and ended up hurting my knee early on in the process. And when I hurt my knee, I decided that I was going to rehab and go through the surgery and rehab and go back and play ball. But during that time, I started taking some night classes at Allen Hancock College and doing night classes for the fire service. And I just instantly, it clicked for me. But I remember talking to my dad about that I wanted to pursue the career. And I remember him telling me, he wished that he hadn't missed so many of those times growing up. And that stuck with me. As I did get into the career, it did stick with me. And it's something that I then focused on with my own family to make sure that I did better at. I did better at than what I had growing up. And when you talk about that loss of identity when you're gone, My dad ended up hurting his back in the fire service. So he was, just about 40 years old, and all of a sudden he was retired. And when he retired, we moved. We moved from the Ventura County area to the San Luis Obispo area up in Paso Robles, and out into the country where my mom's side of the family, my grandparents and uncles and cousins, they owned place out there, and we bought nearby. My parents built a house, and during that time we lived in a travel trailer while the house was being built, and my dad was miserable. You took the fire service away, and then you moved away from all of his friends, right, and all of those coworkers. And you think, I've talked a lot about this to the younger generation of firefighters when they come in. You think that these bonds and these friendships and that you have in the firehouse are going to last with you forever. And the minute that you walk away from it, the phone calls stop, the communication stops, and all of a sudden you feel extremely lonely and out on an island by yourself. And so I was actually glad I lived through that part of my life, because it made me much more aware of what I was going to step into when I did jump into retirement and went through my own mental health issues, because I ended up feeling the same exact thing. The phone call stopped. I was off for 3 months when I got the first phone call from my fire chief, and I was number 2 in charge. I ended up having one phone call over 18 months of being off. One phone call to check in, and from my fire chief. I obviously had some phone calls from the ones who I was closest with, and I put it on myself to make sure that I stayed in contact as much as I could. But that separation when you leave the fire service is a real thing. And I think the more that people understand that and are prepared for it going into it, and whether you retire on disability or whether you retire straight up on a service retirement, it's going to happen. And somebody else is going to fill your shoes the very next day when you leave there, and the department goes on, and it moves on just like you weren't there, and you hope that you made a difference when you were there, but you need to be ready for it when you step out.
Absolutely. My favorite crew, and I've worked with some amazing firefighters in different departments, but the most cohesive, true brotherhood was when I was in Anaheim, California for a few years. I literally was just talking to my truck captain, just literally 2 days ago. He came to Disney and we went down and hung out for the day. But I left Anaheim in 2008. So that is a crew that we still talk to this day, but that's out of 14 years of working 4 different departments. So that illustrates, again, this is very, they say you can count your true friends on one hand, and that's not casting shade. It's just simply the reality that you have, brothers and sisters that you work with in the fire service. A lot of them are colleagues at the end of the day. And when you leave, not only, is it kind of out of sight, out of mind, and there's no kind of negativity behind that, but also we got to remember that the people are still they're working these crazy shifts. They're so sleep deprived. They don't have time to think about how we're doing because they're just trying to get home to their families.
100%. And one of the common themes, because I brought it up, I was off for about 6 months. I went back for a short period of time. And when I went back, I had done a lot, talk therapy and all the different stuff that they want to put you through the work comp process. And one of the things I was determined on, and I'd always kind of lived my career that way, was to make sure that I shared the experience with as many people as I could. And the first event that I worked back at Levi Stadium, instead of working up in the command post, I chose to be on the ground and be out with the crews. And I walked around, I talked to them, and I shared that, man, it's really hard. You guys got to remember that when people are off, you need to check in on them, whether they're your crew, whether, they're just, I said, because I felt it. And I think it's important you guys understand it and that we check in on our people. And I shared that with our battalion chiefs. If they have people off on their shift, we should be checking in on them regularly and make that a part of our routine. And so many of the answers were, Chief, we wanted to call so bad, but we didn't know what to say. We didn't know if you'd want to talk to anybody or if you needed your space or, right. And you realize then on the other side of it about they're struggling with it as much as you are about that conversation. And that's why it's like, if we can break down that barrier and just understand that it's those short phone calls of just, hey, checking in to see how you're doing, and they actually make a difference.
What I love now is the voice text that you can do. So rather than texting, because that can be, interpreted in a number of ways, just drop someone a voice text. Hey, I was thinking about you, hope you're doing okay. How's rehab going? Whether it's physical or whatever it is that you're going through. But then, that's just reaching out and they're hearing your actual voice. And then, if they don't respond at that time, okay, maybe they need a little space. But there's one guy I had, and while he was going through his struggles, I messaged him over and over again and never got a response. And this was, overcoming alcoholism, some other things. But when he found sobriety, he said to me, just know that your text meant everything to me. So I didn't need a response as long as I knew that they were being read, as long as he knew that people were thinking about him. So I think, just reaching out regardless and trying to cast away that worry about, is it going to be awkward? And I think, leaning into those voice texts or the video messaging that you can do now, and just leave someone a, hey, we're at station 6. We're just thinking about you today. Hope you're doing well. Give us a call if you feel up for a chat.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Going back to, the dynamic with your father, one of the interesting conversations now, because I've been spearheading trying to make the national professional work week a 42-hour work week. It's crazy that as we sit here in 2026, there's still so much pushback when the oldest fire departments in America work 42-hour work weeks, DC, Boston, FDNY, and yet the rest of us, stretching all the way through the West Coast, are working 56. And now because of that, we've got a recruitment crisis, because and this younger generation is seeing how detrimental some of these working conditions are, not the profession, but conditions. And now you've got these forced mandatories. So now people are working 80, 90, 120 hours a week, which is insane. And there's this kind of chest beating element that, if you're into the job, you just suck it up. You know what you signed up for. And I say bullshit to that. The most important currency isn't your overtime and your check. It isn't your, Instagram post with your mustache and your leather helmet. It's going home to your family when you're supposed to be going home to your family. So you kind of walk this walk in your profession. Talk to me about that. The importance of having that balance where when you're at a station, you're all in, you're giving 24 hours of your best version of yourself, but how important it is to fight for the time to go home to your family.
Oh, yeah. For me, it was crucial. When I told you, I really set myself, I tried to do it different than I had been raised. I really meant that. I was so fortunate. As weird as it sounds, I had a shoulder injury, and I had to have shoulder surgery. So I was put on a 40-hour work week on light duty. And during that time, it happened to be the start of Little League Baseball for my son. And I love to coach. I love baseball. Baseball is just my thing, So I decided I got a really close friend of my wife's, her husband wanted to coach. So we did it together. And on that 40-hour work week, which every firefighter actually despises or is afraid of, the 40-hour work week, the connection that I got with my family, and being home at night to help with homework, and being there for every baseball game, it really changed how I built my 24-hour schedule when I went back. I made sure that I took my personal leave around baseball. I was also the union president. I was in the union leadership, part of the negotiating team from 1999 all the way until I promoted in 2015. So that entire time, I was either a vice president or president of the union. And I can remember battling with the administration's perspective. They wanted to take away the flexibility of our personal leave that we had. We had 48 hours to be able to use our personal leave. And you could use it in small blocks. So you could take, the people who lived in town could take 4 hours or 2 hours and go watch their kid play baseball, or go watch their daughter's gymnastics, or go to the dance recital. And to me, that was such a valuable benefit. And they didn't like it because it was a scheduling nightmare, right, on their end. Well, then I promoted, and we were able to fight that off for the longest time. It ended up changing a little bit to where it was in 12-hour blocks, and but it was I always saw the value of that, and I can proudly say I have missed less baseball games in the course of a 28-year fire service career than I could count on one hand. That's no joke. I made it a priority, but I didn't grow up in a fire service. I didn't come up in the fire service where we were forcing mandatories constantly. And that has changed the dynamic of what is actually happening out there. The amount of forced overtime, and these guys that are trying to coach and trying to be engaged in families, and they're living in the Bay Area where houses are $1.5 million, so they have to live outside of the area. So now they're commuting in long distances. And then you tell them, oh, and by the way, you can't go home tomorrow. After you've just worked 48 hours, now you got to do 72, and you're going to miss your kid's baseball game. And if you think that resentment doesn't end up building up over time across the whole workforce, you're living under a rock, right? And to me, it's been a catastrophic issue with the fire service. And when it wasn't until you and I spoke last time, and you really talked about the work week, and it just clicked for me, right? It just clicked because we have I do believe 100% that the newest generation of firefighters has grown up in a time of COVID. They've had their schools shut down. They've watched people be able to transition to more remote work, which allowed them more time at home with their families and all these things. And it's made our job less appealing to them when they say, wait a minute, I got to go to work for 48 hours at a time, and you're gonna hold me over, and I'm not going to be able to do the life things that make me happy, that allow me to alleviate that stress. So I do think there's a ton of value, and I think my own family would have definitely liked that type of a change in the fire service if I was still there.
I put a post up the other day. The AI, and it's great now. You can create cartoons and all kind of things. I'm a terrible artist, so it's it's a good tool. But it was just a picture of a fire chief hiding behind a desk. There was all these kind of massive boxes with chains on them, and it said recruitment, retention, firefighter suicide. And then on the other side of the desk, who he's hiding from, is a firefighter holding a sign saying 24/72. And one of the comments was, "Well, it's cheaper to pay overtime than it is to hire another firefighter." And that ignorant statement is one of the things that I've been fighting this whole time. If you told a banker, well, it's cheaper to pay you overtime than to hire another banker, bank clerk, grocery clerk, whatever, so we just need you to work 7 days a week, how would that go down in the civilian space? No one would work for the grocery store or the bank or the coffee shop. But in the fire service, where we're already working, 56-hour work weeks, and someone says, well, it's easier for me just to tell you can't go home to your family another day than to actually create a workforce that's healthy. I can't think of a better example of a complete failure of leadership and ethics than to have a statement like that. And so the equal and opposite is true. We know that what we do doesn't work. That's why we have this crisis now. But when you look at the Northeast, when you look at all these departments, from Plano, Texas to Pasco County here in Florida, that are either beginning to, or in Pasco and Gainesville's example, or I've already made this change, and they're shouting from the rooftops about the success that they've had with it. They took the money that was being wasted downstream, and they just proactively invested it in a fourth shift, which drew everyone back in. And now their list is huge again, which is, we'll get to when you were testing. The answers are there, but to force people who have already been working 56 hours a week and tell them, because of your mistake, and the admin, whatever that looks like, city, county, fire administration, who work 40 hours a week and go home at 5 every night, to say, well, they need to work more because it's easier for me. Again, it's time for us as a profession to look in the mirror and go, who are the real leaders? We need to start following them. And I think that those progressive departments that have truly invested in this healthy work week are the tip of the spear on the next generation of the fire service.
Yeah, completely agree. And it's really not just going to land on those the leaders, right, of the administration. When you're talking at that level or at the city leadership, really some of the most vocal people to change are your people within the firehouse, right? Because they're so resistant to it, even though right, they can see the struggle, right? They can see the impacts, but at the same time, those overtime people are so usually the most vocal and usually the most senior. So they end up having a tremendous influence on the others when it comes to that. So your union leadership has to be just as strong and just as courageous to be able to stand up and say, we just had people kill themselves at the fire, on line of duty suicides, and you're going to stand up here and tell me that that you want to work more, like that you watched a 7 and a 10-year-old sons be left behind by their dad, and we don't have the courage to say something needs to change and it's got to be drastic. I mean, that's that, and you're just not. That to me is it's going to take a complete team effort on all sides to ever force that change.
Yeah. Another ignorant statement that I hear a lot from, like you said, I mean, this is, like I've said in the past, who's to blame? All of us, from the probie all the way through to city and county council, everyone in between. If you're fighting it, you're part of the problem. And to be really blunt, blood is on your hands. If you keep losing men and women to all the things that are job related and you refuse to be part of the change, then shame on you. And when I hear, for example, 4896 is the best shift around, when we're talking about 2472, you're literally saying, I'd rather work 56 away from my family rather than 42. It makes no sense. I want to work 14 hours for the same salary. Like, why? Think about what you're saying. So anyway, yeah, it's on our shoulders all the way through the ranks. It's on our politicians. It's on our citizens to actually learn more about what we do and find out why, we need this money up front to for the next 3 or 4 years to create this fourth shift that will then offer a higher delivery of service and save them, make the taxpayers, the money that they are giving through their taxes be used, efficiently and proactively. It's all of us, but it begins, like you said, with the courageous voices throughout the ranks. So I couldn't agree more. You mentioned about transitioning into the fire service then. So talk to me about, your on-ramp experience, and then how competitive was it to be a firefighter back then?
Yeah, I remember when I first started, I first started with CAL FIRE as a seasonal employee, a seasonal wildland firefighter out past Robles. So I got 2.5 seasons there while I was still going to Cal Poly. I was going to Cal Poly and I did seasonal firefighting. So I was 18, that was my 18 to 21-year-old phase of my life. And so I hired at 18. And then I got hired by Santa Clara when I was 21 years old. And I remember there was over 2,000 people that took the test, and they hired 6 of us.
And that was certified people, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Now I was in 1997, it was a joint recruitment it was a Bay Area joint recruitment where I actually took the test. It was like for 5 different agencies throughout the Bay Area. I took the test out in Fresno, which is 4 hours away from Santa Clara, nowhere near there. Placed high on that list, and then they picked off of that list, and then we were brought in for the physical agilities and then the oral boards. So, but yeah, even as a deputy fire chief, we were trying to figure out, wow, how do we whittle down 1,500 applications? That was the stuff we were dealing with towards the end when I was getting ready to leave. It was like, oh geez, I hope we can find enough people to get through the background process now to hire, and then we better take 15 to the background because we were literally having people that we were offering jobs to turn it down. And you're talking firefighters in the Bay Area are starting at almost $140,000, $150,000 a year, and they're turning the job down. And because when they did the math, the math didn't math for them when they had to live so far away, and they couldn't afford to live in the area, and they didn't want to commute that far. And so and then with post-COVID, I think people were just like, man, I don't want to be the one out there dealing with all the sick people, and they just didn't want to, and we just watched our numbers crash. And on top of that, they're hearing about the mental health crisis, and they're talking to people, and it used to be you'd walk into a fire station and a new recruit would come in, and it would be this glow of excitement, and your firefighters would be so excited to talk about the department, and that just changed. You just watched it change. And something's got to happen in order to keep the fire service healthy and relevant. And the longer I went, I was no different, right? I was working myself silly as a deputy chief, having been the union president, who everyone then expected when I got to deputy chief, I could affect every single change that I ever wanted as a union president. And I tried, man, I tried. And then all of a sudden your own people that were some of your best friends are now pointing fingers at you and accusing you that you've changed sides just because your color of your badge changed, and the amount of impact that has on an individual at the chief level, or even down the ranks, right? That organizational betrayal it probably leads to more, in my opinion. You can categorize organizational betrayal in so many different things, but if I would say that leads to more career fatalities, I would call them, right? Whether you just leave the career, or it leads to a suicide, or it leads to all these other unhealthy things. I think that's one of the biggest causes that we bury our head in the sand about most of the time.
I couldn't agree more. And the number of people I've heard that, even people that are revered in the country, they go to other people's conferences and they're the keynote speaker or whatever. And then you hear about how they're received in their own department, and it's awful. And it's definitely one of the two kind of elephants in the room. The biggest one is sleep deprivation, because there's an undeniable, scientifically proven direct correlation between sleep deprivation and all things ill health, mental and physical. But then, like you said, that organizational betrayal, because when we go through an orientation, we're beaten down, and I am now, a proud Anaheim firefighter, or a proud, Orange County firefighter. And then all of a sudden I get in, and now they cut your legs from you, and now no, you can't go home. You got another mandatory. Where are you going? Oh, I'm going home to my family, but you need to stay here and work. That's, when you said that you would literally die for a tribe, and then they turn their back on you like that, as a species, if you go back since the dawn of man, if the tribe turns their back on you, that means that you're going to starve to death, or you're going to get killed by another tribe, or whatever it is. So it's in our DNA to serve and be loyal, but then that can also be completely detrimental if that very tribe that you've got wearing on your shoulder then turns their back on you like that.
Yeah, 100%. And it's everything from, I watched, I like getting the word out there. Like one of the most stressful things, we can talk about the calls, we can talk about all those things. One of the most stressful things that a firefighter will do in the course of their career is take a promotional exam. You prep for, and why? I remember I'm a good test taker. I was a good interviewer. I was comfortable. And if I went into a fire test and I tested against 1,500 people and I didn't get it, the only people that knew about that was my family, right? That was it. And that's if I told them I was taking the test. But in the fire service, you live and breathe. You go on calls. You live with these people every single day. They've helped you prepare, and all of a sudden you go into a promotional exam and you don't do well. The amount of shame that you feel personally, that you've let down those people that you work with, you think they look at you differently now, and all of those things. I have watched that tank more careers, like from a positivity point of view, And then people will not put themselves in that situation again. And all of a sudden now they're angry, they're bitter, and whoever checks in on them. I know that I had this happen when I was promoted to deputy chief, and I held a promotional exam, and some of my best friends took the test, and one of them didn't do so well, and it ruined that friendship forever. And because I was the one who put the test together, all these things, and it wrecked me right on the inside, but I didn't know what to do either. But what I did recognize right away was, when somebody doesn't pass a promotional exam, they better not find out from a letter. They better find out from the people who put the test together with a personal phone call to let them know that, hey man, you didn't pass. I just wanted to let you know up front. This is, you needed to keep in contact with those people. And when we talk about organizational betrayal, if we're not willing to step up as fire service leaders and do those types of things, and we're not willing to step up and check on the people who are off injured going through the work comp process, which feels like it's absolutely set up to treat you like garbage, and not help you, that's not on us. But if we don't do anything about that work comp process, and we don't realize the stress that it puts on our people by checking in on them, then we, as the leaders of the organization, are the ones that we're part of the system. We're as bad and we're as evil as the broken system that we forced them to go through. I think from a leadership point of view, we have to acknowledge all of those little things. Like you said, policy, right? It could be bad policy that's an organizational betrayal that nobody's willing to fix, even though they know it's not a good policy. I could talk about that stuff for a long time. Somebody goes through an investigation. I've been on all these things, right? I've been on both sides of all these things. I was either the union rep on discipline cases, or I was being investigated because somebody accused me of something that I did, or that I didn't do. But the way that I felt when I had to sit down with an HR investigator because somebody pointed the finger at me as a deputy chief and said that I treated them unfairly, and I have to provide all this documentation, it makes you feel like you're guilty right from the beginning. The way that felt, and the way that our people feel when they go through those things, can't be taken lightly. And if you're going to keep your workforce mentally in a healthier place, you need to start by brainstorming all of those types of incidents in your organization and having the awareness to then have your leadership and your peers check in on those people.
I think what is exciting about this whole conversation is, as we are identifying all these issues now, and I would say, I put a post on this not long ago. We lost Chief David Dangerfield 10 years ago, now, almost 10 years ago. And he was the Florida, I think he was a deputy chief, took his own life, but he put a Facebook post right before saying PTSD is real, check on each other, to my crew, I love you. And then that was it. And it was absolutely devastating. But there's been such a metamorphosis of this conversation in the last 10 years. And I'm, so fortunate to have had so many people on here like yourself really kind of help unpack this. So now as we're emerging, we have not only identified what's broken, but we've also brought, as we're going to talk about later, so many other solutions. And circling around to the competitive nature of when you were trying to get hired in the 90s, and then myself a few years later, when I hear people say, for example, we have a recruitment crisis, how are we supposed to get these extra firefighters? It's like, well, by fixing the things that are broken. Are you so short? Is your memory so short that you can't recall that only 10, 15, 20 years ago, you had firefighters trying for years to become a firefighter? And you had, lists, as you said, of thousands and thousands of people for a handful of jobs. That's where we used to be. That's where we should be when you look about what we're expected to do, within a 24-hour period. And so we can get back there, and we can identify the organizational betrayal, and we can really address toxic leadership or toxic, at any rank, and start forging what is supposed to be the brotherhood and the sisterhood of the fire service. And if you really go back to the academy, would you leave your partner behind in a primary search? Of course not. Would you send the hose, a guy in with a hose and then turn around and run? The same level of cowardice that I'm seeing with people not addressing the things that are killing our first responders. No, you wouldn't graduate the fire academy if you were a coward, full stop. And even to the point, if we want to push it one step further, if you were, 50 pounds overweight and refused to do any PT, would you make it through fire academy? No. But then 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, you're opposing fitness standards. We have identified all these elements now that we know are broken, and that's fine because now we have an opportunity to fix it. And what you're saying as well is that all these positions, we can just do better if we actually reflect on, what's not working. Forgive ourselves. We did the best with what we had at that time, but this is a different time now. So let's have a conversation about how can we do it better. And I love the fact that there are departments all over the country that are already doing it better. We say, hey, Florida, can we borrow this from you? Okay, Nevada, you're doing this really well. New York, phenomenal. We're going to take this bit. And as I've said, then the rising tide lifts all ships. But if we stay siloed and every city and county thinks that they're the best fire department in the country and everyone else is shit, then we're not going to improve at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I can remember one of I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about just the things that I've gone through in the course of the career from a mental health perspective, but I can remember, and I think we talked about this privately, was in 1999, we had a very tragic, fatal fire on Christmas Eve, and we lost 2 4-year-old girls, a 9-year-old boy, and their father, and the mother and the infant baby got out and survived. I was on that fire, helped drag out the dad and the 9-year-old boy, but the resistance to that was my first experience of going to a critical incident stress debriefing, and our department made it mandatory that the people who were on that call go. And I'll never forget the resistance to people that said, I do not want to go. You're forcing me to go. And I sat in that room and I watched these grizzled veterans that I just looked up to that were all saying they didn't want to go, that then broke down, right? They broke down. And you could see it all start to flood out. And it made a dramatic impression on me. I got elected to the union leadership right after that. I watched that struggle still of the pushback of even just adopting a real true peer program, right, to help each other after tragic incidents, and it was still hard to get people to accept it. And I was the union president. I had a great, amazing vice president. We got hired together. She's just her tenacity to get stuff done is phenomenal. And she has been a champion for all of our CISD and all of our mental health advancements that we've made in our department. All we wanted to do was we pitched the idea to the fire chief, I did as union president, that we just wanted to start this now in the academy. Let's start doing this in the academy. Like, this is probably, 2013, 2012. Let's start doing these in the academy to just give them an opportunity to have gone through one, break down the uncertainty of what it is, and honestly, is there a more stressful time in their small fire service life than the academy, when every day they're under pressure and they're getting yelled at, and if they don't do good on a test, they may have to go home, and their families, all of it, it's stressful as hell. And all we want to do was run them through a debrief at the end of that. And our fire chief said, no, I think that's putting too much liability, his exact words, is too much liability, JD, to put on the city. We're saying then that this is such a traumatic thing in our fire academy that they need to have a critical incident stress debrief because of it. And it's like, what? Like, aren't we more concerned that they start their career healthy, that they understand this process, that we make this organizational change to try to break down this resistance to it and to start to make real cultural change and acceptance? And the answer was no. Well, it pissed us off both so much that we ended up inviting all those recruits down to the union office, down to the union hall, and we did a pizza night and we did a debriefing. And that chief was pissed. He was pissed. How could you do this? Hey, this is union business. We did it off away from the clock. Like but you know what? It made our point. It made our point, and the advancements that we've seen organizationally since then I think have been phenomenal. But yeah, we need to do better, right? We need to we need to make this right from the beginning part of the educational process for our firefighters as we bring them in. And we should be hiring mental health professionals to work in these agencies to have an outlet. People bring in physical trainers. We send them away to, we have physical trainers in a lot of organizations, but yet we don't have anybody to go to if we're struggling with our mental health unless we go outside of the agency. But I think there's some real value to start to bring people in to be there full time.
I've said this recently. Again, I'm a perpetual student. None of this is, my revelations, but listening to all the great minds I've had on here, the prevalence of arguably a lot of times unaddressed childhood trauma in uniform is, again, in the scientific world accepted as high. I think on the ACEs, we on average are 6 out of 10. So adverse childhood experience score. And that doesn't mean that we're the wrong fit, quite the opposite. What it means, though, if that's buried down, if it's pushed down and not addressed, and then we enter this profession and we see all the horrible things and pull kids out of house fires and have these horrendous wrecks and sleep deprivation, et cetera, now that foundation is already fractured. There's a higher chance that it's going to be worse. And I found this even just observationally on the show. Pretty much every single person that got to the point of suicide ideation or even an attempt, there's an unaddressed childhood element that really reared its ugly head as well. So what a beautiful opportunity for a conversation at the front door to these new recruits to say the fact that you are standing here now means that you've probably had some struggles prior to this, and they will become an absolute strength. This is resilience. If we work through them, if we bury them down and ignore them, they can become, a fracture, like I said. So now you've got, just like PT, we're going to be running stairs, we're going to do push-ups. It's the same with this. We want to address your mental health so you can perform at a high level. So when you go, you've climbed 15 stories and then you enter the apartment and you try and do a primary and look for a 3-year-old, you are, your mind is ticking over in a flow state almost. So knowing that there's this, this history of trauma for a lot of us in uniform, at the front door, not just say, oh, you've had a bad life. Let's talk. Framing it like performance. Like we're gonna make you into an incredibly high performing first responder. And one of the tools in the toolbox are counseling, breath work, yoga, etc., so that we can help you process what happened before you got here and make that an absolute superpower in uniform. And I think that is how you frame the mental health conversation at the front door. Because a lot of us, 18, 19, 20, we're not thinking about, or at least our generation wasn't thinking about our mental health. But if you told me, well, James Gearing, I need you to be the best firefighter you can be, and this is one of the things that you're going to have to do, I'm not going to question it then.
Yeah, I completely agree. And as much as, and I'll just add to kind of close that loop for us, is that where else it's really important, and because we haven't started right where that's consistent at the ground level, is that we also need to start doing that for our retirees as they're going out the door. I mean, I think that, I bet we could safely say that our suicide numbers could easily be double to triple if we included our retirees. Because they're missed, right? We're not capturing how many people are killing themselves after they leave the job, because now they don't have the community, they don't have the tribe, they don't have any of it, and they're struggling every single day. They don't have the resources, and nobody's watching in on them. And next thing you know, I'm getting the phone call that one of our retirees has committed suicide, and we're missing those people. And like in my own mental health kind of journey, one of the things that we did what organizationally, and again, the same person who I was working with in the union, she went out and was finding resources for us that we could get for our people. And one of the things that we came across was it's really, really important to have mental health professionals locally that understand first responder PTSD, right? You need to have somebody, not just somebody who does normal PTSD. They need to understand first responders, and we had that person in Karen Lansing, and she's known as the cop whisperer. And anyways, we brought her in and did presentations to the organization, and started with the leadership. And we ended up that the union was able to negotiate that we could get 20 visits with her or other mental health professionals, but she ended up being one that was seen a lot. And her focus was EMDR. And we did, and so I thought, well, I know that I've got as a deputy chief, that's when we worked to bring her in. I know that I've got a suitcase full on my back, of things that I could definitely want to unload, and what kind of leader would I be if I'm not willing to go through it myself if we're offering these resources. So I did it, and it was extremely successful for me when I went through EMDR with her, and I went, and there were so many calls in my brain that I didn't even realize were staying with me. And when I went through the EMDR process and was able to really break those things down, and I left feeling so much lighter. I left feeling like I had cleaned it out. I had emotionally released those things that I had doubted about myself or how I handled calls, and it was really helpful. And I remember feeling like, man, if the retirees would do this right before they retired, and they could offload some of these calls or help get the skills to process those calls better, it would save some lives, and it would allow them to have a healthier. We all want that healthy retirement where we strive for it. That's one of the things that we all hold as such value in the profession, and I think that. So I came away feeling like we can't ever forget about them either, but yet there really is nothing being done for them if we really look across the fire service as a whole. There's not a whole lot of agencies out there that are offering resources out to your retirees.
I've said on here many times, there's no VA for first responders. And I would say that it would be way more than double or triple even. If you think about, firstly, what's terrifying, there's a national conversation that we on average die within 5 years of retirement. Now, that's already, if I'm not mistaken, 12 years younger than the average civilian. But you think about who's towing the line on that drill ground. I would say they were probably the more resilient, physically fit members of that community who would arguably supposed to be living longer than the average civilian. So those lifespans are probably cut closer to 20 years. And so you think about this, you do 20, 25 years in the fire service. Right when you transition out at, let's say, 55, you've got this whole suitcase, like you said. Now you've lost your tribe, you've lost your identity, you've lost your purpose. Who is the most vulnerable group? It's the people on, who the door closed behind them the last time. And now possibly because what we talked about earlier, they go back to an empty home because their marriage isn't, intact anymore and their kids don't talk to them anymore. And no one's calling, circling around to what you also said. And so I would say probably it's the tip of the iceberg, the numbers that are published versus who we're actually losing. Because, if someone passes away at 70, but they should have lived to be 90, that's a 20-year span, but they got cancer or they got heart disease or, they died in alcoholism or they took their own life. And as you mentioned, none of these people are being counted. So to look at the stats, we lost, 100 firefighters this year. No, we didn't. We know suicides and overdoses are double, triple that in itself. Not to mention then everyone that took the uniform off at whatever age and now ceases to be a statistic. So I couldn't agree more. We need to firstly create an environment so people want to stay a full career if that's what works for them. But absolutely, it should be focused on them transitioning healthily into maybe a second occupation, into at least being a present, parent, grandfather, whatever they end up being. But that disposable heroes element, well, it's like, all right, well, thanks for your 25 years. Here's Cobra for a year. And then, good luck with everything. That is such a spit in the face to the first responders. If we can forge an environment that keeps them healthy through their career, then they won't be dying in droves. But I think it would be shocking if we actually could annotate the number of people whose lifespans are shortened because of volunteering a life of service like this. I think you'd see, it'd be a mountain of deaths attributed to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree.
Well, I want to transition into another area that, I know you're very, that was a big part of your career. So what made you enter the USAR teams? And then let's talk about some notable events that you went to with that.
Yeah, I was, from the beginning of my fire service career, I wanted to be on the truck companies, and that was just what I was good at. I was good at rope rescue. I was good at all of the different rescue disciplines. It was just what I wanted to do, and what I wanted to focus on throughout my career. And I got lucky early on to be able to get those opportunities. So it was either USAR opportunity came up. Our department decided to send some people to paramedic school. And as a part of that process, some people that had been serving on California Task Force 3 from our agency stepped down to be able to pursue paramedicine. And those spots opened up, and I put in for them, and I got one. So early on in my career, I got kind of my dream, which was to now be on a national, urban search and rescue team that could respond across the country. So that happened slightly before 9/11. I did not, the team deployed to 9/11. I was ready to go, and we got stood back for a couple days. And in that process, our department ended up sending a few of our senior people over the brand new guys. And so I didn't go to 9/11. But I did go to Hurricane Katrina. And during that deployment, it was, it's almost beyond like an explanation. It's one of those things where you're there, and what you see is hard to explain. And the political struggle that you get tossed right into the middle of in these USAR deployments is actually way more impactful on the responders than you could imagine, because there's nothing we can do to control it. And I say that because at Hurricane Katrina, we went into the 9th Ward right in the beginning on the first day that we got there. And we drove actually from California, and we got stopped in Houston and put in a hotel in the very beginning, because when the system activated, they activated all the teams at once, and they realized they had no logistical way to bring all those teams in at the same time and be able to take care of them, feed them, house them, all of that. So they stopped us in Houston, and now we had to sit in a hotel and watch people being rescued off roofs, waving signs. We knew they needed the help, but we couldn't get there. So once we get there, we get into the 9th Ward, and literally that first day, we're tying bodies that were floating to trees. We would tie them to a tree, and we would GPS their locations, call those in, and then the body recovery people would come out and take them. We were cutting holes in every roof that hadn't had a hole in it already, because in New Orleans, they have people, they've been taught if the levees were to break and you were to flood, you're below ground, you're below sea level, so retreat to the attic, and then either break out or somebody will come looking for you. So that's what we did. And we did that. And then the very next day, we were running into people who didn't want to leave because they had nowhere to go. And they're the poor of the poor in our country, and they didn't have anywhere to go. And we're trying to explain to them, you can't stay here. You have no water, you have no food. I don't have anywhere to go. So we would tell them we'd check back in on them, the next day, and when you're ready to go, we'll take you out of here. And what would happen? We would get pulled out of that area. and we would be sent to a high and dry area that had been searched already, but it was a much more affluent part of the community. And the political pressure was pulling USAR teams to areas that had already been searched or that didn't need to be searched because those people weren't in the danger. So I just share that because we were 28 days in to this since the levees had broke and flooded the area. And we were searching an area that had been searched before, but it was still flooded. And the boat, we were in a boat with a Coast Guard person driving the little metal boat. And my partner says, "Did you hear somebody yell out?" And sure enough, we shut the engine off. You hear somebody yelling. We look to the house. There's this house with this gigantic tree out in front. And behind that tree, in the branches, you could see as we motored up, there's a man standing in the window. And so I go up and "Hey, sir, are you ready to get out of here?" In my mind, this area has been searched. He's refused to leave at some point. Well, that wasn't the case. That giant tree had blocked any boat access when the waters were high. No boat could get up to that. This man, 78 years old, had retreated to his attic. He had rode out the storm because he wanted to help protect the church. So he stayed and went to the church and helped the church through the hurricane. They make it through the hurricane, decides, okay, his family had all left to Mississippi. He decided to go back home, sleep through the night, was going to go the next morning. And what happened? The levees broke and Lake Pontchartrain flooded that whole area. And he took a giant 7-Eleven big gulp cup and filled it with water and retreated to the attic. He'd been there for 28 days. 28 days. And I'll never forget when he says, "You're the first person." You're what? Oh my gosh! We radio it in, and we take him out of there. And what ended up happening was the FEMA people had already declared it a recovery mission, not a rescue mission. And now we found somebody, so it became national news. We were on Anderson Cooper. We were on everything you could imagine, right? And I had been in the fire service that was my 8th year at that time. And now all of a sudden they're telling me, you're going to say, they put a FEMA hat on me. They told me what I was going to have to say, what the message had to be. It just was like, it just was the most stressful part of my young fire service career, and it's kind of fun now. There's books where I'm pictured in there with my kids took those to their elementary school when they went because there I was in the history of Hurricane Katrina. But I share it because I didn't realize how all those stresses added up until later in my career. Sure was proud of it, but there were little moments, and you talk about organizational betrayal. We didn't shave while we were there. Santa Clara, my department, is extremely tight on their grooming standards. And we didn't shave because if you shaved, you were exposed to all these toxins and all this bad stuff from all this stuff. So they finally told us that we could shave, but the rescue guys decided to leave a goatee. So we all did. I've never had one of those, but now I'm on national news with a goatee. And I'll never forget, but my fire chief at one point, somebody I was pretty close with too, he says, "Man, that was pretty, it sure was a proud moment to see on TV, but kind of couldn't believe that you had a goatee." It's like, what? That's what we worry about right now? I just remember feeling that, that at the end of what that made a person feel like, right? So, so USAR, and then I ended up being off of the team for a little bit, and when I promoted to deputy chief, I came back and was a plans team manager, deployed to Hurricane Irma and a couple others, and then I made it all the way up to task force leader, and was the leader of one of the 3 non-Menlo Park. There's 3 Menlo Park leaders, and then 3 from all the other agencies. So I was one of those 3 alongside just a couple legends in the USAR world, and Joe Carvello and Carl Custon that I just looked up to so much and couldn't believe that I had made it that far in my career to be alongside there and to be responsible for a team of 80 people when you go out the door was a tremendous honor.
That example you gave with the facial hair reminds me of when I worked for Orange County. It wasn't me, it was one of my, the stations next to us who just got murdered every single shift. And I don't know what they'd come back from, but it probably was horrendous. And they're literally backing the rescue out of the ambulance parking space in the ER. That's it. Undercover, right in, next to the ER doors. And they get written up for not wearing a road vest. Now think about that. They probably just dropped off who knows what, some horrendous scene. They might be on a mandatory after being told that morning that they couldn't go home. They're running these calls. They've cleaned the unit. They're getting back in service. And that's what you see at that moment is like, oh, that person needs to be wearing a vest to back, in the road. Yes, but that wasn't even a policy as far as I remember. But, you hear this as well with grooming standards. And one of the biggest things that I see a lot of people talking about is you will have a department that fights fitness standards, but they'll tell you can't have your hair longer than X amount. It's like, well, what's more important for a delivery of service and the health of your firefighters? So, I think that's a really good example of like when it's just a read the room moment. If you've had people deployed in Katrina and there was no running water and, filth and, everywhere that the eye could see, and you're going to focus in on a goatee, maybe you just need to take a beat and reconsider your observation.
Yeah, and to go that full circle, because I'm sure plenty of my buddies will be listening to this eventually. When I said I wasn't on the team there for a little window, that was because at the end of that deployment on day 28, when we had been demobbed and were told we were going home, one of the logistics guys, he had some coronas because he was out at the store. So he got coronas. We're demobbed, and there were 6 of us that were sitting around and had one corona each sitting there. And the FEMA people about lost their mind. But we were going home the next morning. And so anyway, my fire chief and the deputy chief at the time deemed that as alcohol consumption on duty. And and their decision for that was to remove me from the team. So I came back from this deployment, and I didn't mention that when I left, my daughter was 21 days old. So I left my wife at home with a 3-year-old and a 21-year-old and 21-day-old daughter. And so she was doubled her days on this earth by the time I got home. And my reward for it, instead of being proud, was that I was removed from the team. So it actually chokes me up now, because I could have let it ruin me, and I felt like it did for a little bit. And but then I decided, you know what? I'm gonna flip this thing, and I'm gonna use it in the interviews as an experience that I'd gone through. And I flipped it, and I ended up being promoted to captain before I was 30 years old. I was promoted at 29. And obviously I was ended up being union president, and so when I made it to task force leader and I got back on that team and I made it all the way to task force leader, this sense of pride of that accomplishment of having not let it ruin me, it was heavy. It still is. It's something I'm probably most proud of in my career.
Very powerful. You mentioned about the politics amidst what should simply be a rescue operation. When I was at Orange County, we had the earthquakes in Haiti, and bearing in mind I'm Central Florida, these poor people are just a few hundred miles away from where the station was, and I wrote an email proactively saying, look, I speak French, somewhat. Are we sending people? And nothing happened. And eventually an email went around and they said, we're looking for people that want to volunteer to go to Haiti. If you speak French. I was like, okay, perfect. Finally going to get to go. And they were still pulling out, live people from the collapses when they shut the USAR response down. And I never understood it, not only from the humanitarian point of view, but even if you just selfishly from these crews that get experience that then go back to California or, places that are going to have earthquakes. And I never, to this day, I never understand why we would pull so many people when rescues were still active, especially literally our next door neighbors in that case. So, now you have a more of a macro lens, being in a leadership position. What are some of the challenges for our USAR teams that want to be out there helping, but they're pulling on the reins from the political side?
Boy, yeah, the amount of passion and towards the rescue disciplines on these teams is amazing to me. But the people are just across the 28 teams that are based in the United States are, they all want to go to work. They all now we're seeing that they, like Menlo Park, is that team doesn't have enough funding, but yet they're so passionate, and they have such a strong support from their board of supervisors that they're literally fundraising to keep things going. And that's a federal government agency. And every single homeland security change that we end up having, right? It changes how our resources are deployed. It used to be that they would do a rotation and deploy the resources by a rotation that would allow the teams to kind of equally get that experience. Because if you don't get deployed for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, that team is doing only training. Their overall capabilities are not the same as a team like Virginia or Florida, or those teams that on the East Coast are actually putting their stuff to, their deployments and all that every single year, multiple times a year. So they changed, so it used to be that a California team like myself, I went all the way out for Hurricane Irma, all the way to Florida, right? We went to Katrina. Then they changed it to more of a regional model to where, the security people were like, well, we're not going to pay. It doesn't make any sense to pay a team from California to travel all the way to Louisiana when we can take the Texas teams and the closer teams and move them in. But what you're seeing is then a definite disparity in the experience levels on the teams across the country. So, I mean, yeah, you get caught square in the middle of the political, and then when there are deployments, like you said, you get pulled out of areas based on political pressure, based on money, based on influence to go into areas that maybe your resources aren't needed as much. There's a definite, our job is to go in and support the local agencies. That's your job, right? Your job as a USAR team is to go in and to support the local agencies. But when those state agencies, then they don't want you there. It can be definitely a power struggle that you get caught square in the middle of, and it's not fun. When you see the work that you could be doing and how you could help.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It just over and over again you hear the bureaucracy getting in the way of us doing our job, and then it's that amnesia again. After 9/11, there was federal resources being thrown everywhere, and so many teams were built up, and they had all the training. And then, well, we haven't had 9/11 for a few years, so let's just start cutting it. Well, yeah, the FDNY firefighters were heroes, but now they want us to pay for their cancer, so we're gonna stop that. And it's nauseating, because I just don't understand how the memory again is so short, because the whole point is to be prepared for the next thing, not to have a knee jerk after it happens. Be prepared for a few years and then just start picking it apart again.
Yeah. I don't know what that solution is. That's for sure. Especially it's a sad state of affairs just overall in the political in politics these days, right? It's so sad to me for my kids, because to watch my kids who have grown up in this era where the nastiness of the political language and words used back and forth towards each other is so disrespectful. It's just sad, because that's all they know, right? I got a 23-year-old son and a 20-year-old daughter, and that's all they know, because that's all they've seen from the time they could actually understand kind of what was going on. So I don't know how we're going to get out of it until people have finally had enough of all of it.
I've called out our generation, and the reason I say that I was raised in England on TV shows like Blue Peter, John Craven's Newsround, Comic Relief, Live Aid, where there was a real focus on community, on service, on helping each other, on, raising money for a country called Ethiopia that was, thousands of miles away that we'd never met, but they were starving. And so English children would, sell sandwiches and do jumble sales and things to raise money. And we'd all put our, whatever we made, £6 together and with the rest of the school, and it would go off and support that thing. And if you look at America, the same generation, Mr. Rogers, Reading Rainbow, God, I'm blanking on his name now, the artist, Bob Ross. I mean, again, our generation was raised on kindness and compassion. And I really feel like we're also the generation that's straddling this technological revolution as well. We were raised prior to computers and cell phones. And then, by the time our children were born, they were already in our space. So I feel like Gen X, we need to be the voice because we remember what it was like growing up in the 80s, 70s, where there was that kindness and community and you did go out until the streetlights came on. And rather than, rolling your eyes and saying kids today, it's like, well, yeah, but we raised kids today. So we owe it to them to teach them the childhood that we had, all the good stuff at least, so that they understand what life should look like. And presidents shouldn't be speaking like that about each other. And, the sports stars or whoever these horrendous role models that are put in front of them, that's not an American. An American is someone like the men and women, for example, that you wore USAR uniforms with, and the incredible citizens that were so heroic during Katrina as well. Like those are real Americans. And I feel like we need to put that front and center. And our generation, it really is us that needs to be the voice because we were there when things were better. And we need to steer everyone back to where, the kind of experience that we had when we were young.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm super proud of my kids, and I think my kids are the way they are because my wife is just an amazing human being, right? And she's so caring and compassionate to the people of the world that she has influenced in myself as well to our children, and so I'm hopeful, because I know that they know it's wrong and they know that what the times we're living in aren't the best and that they can make a difference. And, and I hope that, and I'm confident they will, but it's going to take a whole group of them to do it, a whole country full of them. So yeah, hopefully we can make that difference.
Absolutely. Well, I want to get to, your powerful mental health story, but one more area before we do. We talked about responding to disasters. Let's talk about the preemptive element now. You had Super Bowl 50. I think, one of the most horrendous things to watch, for example, is an Uvalde-like incident where something horrendous happens and then people are like, oh, we were ill prepared. Talk to me about now shifting it where you're proactively training and preparing for a potential event.
Yeah, so when I was promoted in 2015, that's why I was promoted. We were down to deputy chief, and Super Bowl 50 was coming in February of 2016, and they needed to make sure that we were ready, and that was my first assignment. So I felt, you talk about feeling like you're over your skis at first, like I was now going to represent, I was partnered up with one of our police captains, and we were the two public safety leads for the planning for the entire event. And so you get, the NFL is a very large, powerful organization. But what comes with that SIR 1 type level event is that all of these agencies that I've never worked with are all going to bring resources to bear for preparation for the event. So organizing that and being prepared in advance was a tremendous amount of work. And I'm super proud of like the person who took my job after me, Matt Queen. He just recently did the same thing. But to bring all those resources to the table and to be able to work with everybody from the Secret Service to Department of Homeland Security to Customs and Border Protection to our police agencies, to bringing in the Coast Guard for all of their nuclear detection capabilities and hazmat. I mean, the National Guard teams with all their radiation detection. I felt so prepared. And we tabletop exercised so many of these things over the course of a 2-year period about how the responses would go down. And I mean, there's everything from, long guns to protect people if there was a massive event in the parking lot with shooters, or, but there's overhead, surveillance going on for any type of things. They shut down the airspace. There's so much that goes into it, but the overall preparation level to keep those people safe, man, did I feel like, you prepare for as much as you possibly can, and to have all those resources that we were ultimately ready for anything that, might happen. And we would, you never know what it's going to be, but if it happens, we felt like we had the resources locally with all of those groups combined to be able to handle it.
I've told this story a few times on here, and it's public knowledge, but it's something that needs to be repeated, I feel. I went away on holiday a few years ago to Portugal, and while I was away, we had the Pulse shooting. The alligator ate the child on Disney property, and then there was a TV, music competition star who had been killed in Orlando as well. When I come back from that trip, after hearing, seeing what happened at Pulse, and Pulse was literally a club that I would pass in my old department prior on the way to the hospital. We butted up with that Orlando station. And then the new place I worked was the one that protected Disney Springs, the shopping area in Disney, in Florida. And I'm expecting to get hit with all this new training and new equipment and everything, because as we said, when there is a near miss like that, usually there's a ripple effect. And there was nothing, no conversation whatsoever. And as it progressed through, one of my friends who had on the show before, he was the one that killed the shooter. And it became apparent that the shooter actually had gone to Disney Springs first. They have him on camera, with the stroller, and the guns were inside the stroller with a blanket covering it. There were too many sheriff's deputies on that day. He turns around, gets back in his car, drives up to the Pulse nightclub, and then kills all those poor people instead. And what terrifies me is that was the most beautiful opportunity to go, thank God that didn't happen. Let's start exactly what you're talking about. Let's start pre-planning, what we would do. Let's start, upping training with law enforcement, et cetera, et cetera. But there are a lot of agencies out there that have the mentality, well, it hasn't happened, so we're fine. Rather than you listen to, especially in the tech world, let me figure out every single scenario that could potentially happen, within reason, and let's start working out what will we do. At least have a kind of structure, a blueprint of response and training that will mirror that. So God forbid we have an event like this in our, area, that we are on the front foot, like not over the skis, as you said. So talk to me about that. And I think this ties in again with the healthy work week and healthy responders who have a fitness level in place and are well rested to be able to respond at this high level. Talk to me about how an agency should be pre-planning. We have these horrendous shootings now, other incidents that could potentially happen in an American fire service, so that God forbid it happens, they've already done the work prior.
Yeah, one of the things that I think I always tried to instill in our people was to pay attention to what is happening in the world, right? And in around us. And then let's figure out, if that happens here, what we're going to do about it, right? The value of that is massive. One, we got really, really good from being at Levi's Stadium, and we had to write a really large IAP every single event, right? And there's 20 plus events there every single year, and from big concerts to big to football to soccer, all kinds of events. So you get your leadership team gets really, really, really good at building out these IAPs, and your organization gets really good at reading through them and knowing what their their roles are in different events. So because of that, we took that a step further, and our fire chief at the time, who's now no longer with us, Bill Kelly, he loved the idea of then having command staff meetings, and we would pick an incident. Might be an active shooter. But the one that stood out to me the most was we had a very large building that was stick frame construction that was, still in raw form. And it was about 5 stories tall, right on El Camino Real, right downtown. And so he asked me as the ops chief to basically burn that building down, do a simulation and let's burn that thing down. And he didn't want the team to know about it before we got in. So we said, okay, we got an exercise for you. And we basically put the slide up and started this fire in this building, and it started to spread, and it's got a neighborhood behind it. It's got the main drag of commercial buildings in front. It's got it's really boxed into a really kind of a tough area in town if you're going to have a big fire. Well, we did that, and I'm not joking. It wasn't 2 weeks later, and I'm at the training center, and we hear the tones go off. Fire. Battalion chief's there with me. We look over, and we can see the header, and we know that it's that building. And the efficiency of which we fought that fire was, and the whole thing ends up burning down. But we were en route. I was the ops chief. Battalion chief was going to be first in. I was right behind him. Him and I had already made the assignments. En route, I was going to take the Clay Street and protect the homes in the back, and I would need so many resources. He was going to take El Camino Real in the front. But we had that fire under control before we ever got there. And it was all because from a command and control perspective, right? And then as the crews rolled in, it was so well laid out already. We didn't lose a single exposure. We had learned from the big Santana Row fire. If you ever heard of that one, Santana Row is a gigantic shopping center in San Jose, right on the border of Santa Clara. In the early 2000s, when they were building that, a welder accidentally lit a fire and burnt that place down. And when they burnt that down, it started homes on fire that were miles and miles away, complete apartment complexes. And it was because of the fire was so large and the wind was blowing it over 280 and lighting places on fire. I was on those fires downwind. And we had pre-planned that we would, and from the Santana Row from their incident, their post incident review, they had recommended in the future through county trainings that we always send neighborhood crew into the neighborhoods to start patrolling, and we did all of that on this fire. So the value of pre-planning, the value of learning from other people's incidents, I just don't think there's anything more important that can be done at both the company level, it can be done at the management level, at all levels of the organization. You make it a habit. We also had started where every single fire, the first in officer, regardless of how big or how small, every single fire, the first in company officer had to write an incident action review, like a review on it, and submit it to the training division. And the training division would then put out a short little lessons learned from those fires. So, I mean, I think that stuff in our profession is what makes us professionals. If we're not doing it, we're not professionals, right? We're just reacting to a situation, and we're not taking it to the next step.
How do we forge more humility to learn from our own mistakes or near misses, because nothing goes right? I mean, you go to the fire academy and it's so orchestrated because you got your concrete buildings and you're burning pallets, and yeah, congratulations, it went perfectly. But then you get on real scenarios, and there's a car fire, but it's behind a lock, fence, and now you try and break the fence down and the whole thing collapses and you end up with it on top of you. And it's organized chaos a lot of time, and that's a beautiful thing. So the more mistakes that we make, then the more that we can learn. So the humility to learn from your own mistakes, humility to put your near misses out, because I remember, I love Anaheim Fire Department, my favorite fire department, but I do remember that the couple of near miss events that we had, bad events, we didn't talk about those, but we did talk about the near misses from other departments. So that's, that's not the best humility. But then also from a national point of view, we have counties and cities that don't talk to each other. We have PD and FD that hate each other. And there's so many silos in the American Fire Service that it gets in the way of this knowledge sharing. So again, the rising tide. How do we forge that humility across the country so that we can have this open source and really learn from each other so we can all grow and avoid these mistakes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like the influence locally is easy, right? That's the easy part. And when you talk about like Anaheim not talking about their own internal, I think that one way that I did it is I wasn't afraid to say when I screwed up, right? So if you're that's where it starts originally, is that the leadership has to set a safe space and set the example by because I can tell you every single fire I ever ran, there's probably assignments and things that didn't go the way that I wanted them to, that I could have done differently, that I could have done better. And if I was afraid to say those things out loud due to my own ego, then that certainly wasn't going to make the organization better. And then I for sure am not going to expect then the other people downstream to feel comfortable enough to admit their own mistakes. And a lot of times in these reviews, what happens? The battalion chief or whoever the IC is that runs those reviews comes in and starts saying everything that went wrong instead of everything that went right. And flipping those narratives. But being at a national level, yeah, for me, the one of the best things I ever did was went to the National Fire Academy, to the Executive Fire Officer Program, and came out of there with my EFO. And I worked with I went through that program over 4 years with chief officers from all over the country. So you realize right away that we all are facing somewhat similar things, but that every agency has a much different dynamic when it comes to the real hazards and things that are impacting their communities. So now I had built my own personal network of people across the country where the East Coast was already suffering from a huge opioid epidemic, right? That was demanding all of their resources and I was in the Silicon Valley, and though it was a problem, it wasn't crushing our resources like it was theirs. One of the most important things we'll talk about, I'm sure, is the line of duty suicide that we suffered in our agency. And I knew, and one of the people that I'll recommend to you at the end of this that you might want to talk with, he was a classmate of mine. And one of the first phone calls I made the day after our suicide in Santa Clara was to him, because I knew that his agency had handled 2 of them and that he was the fire chief during it. And I needed to know the next steps to take, and I needed somebody to talk to that didn't have that personal connection that had gone through it. So I think that, from a leadership point of view, the bigger you can build your network and have people to reach to and to learn from, the better. From a national learning from each other, making it a part of your culture in some way is important. I just don't know. I don't know the overall solution to making it better everywhere.
Well, let's talk about that. You touched on it then. So talk to me about losing one of your own.
Yeah. So in December 1st of 2021, I'm sitting in a meeting with a bunch of my operations staff, got a phone call from a neighboring fire chief who had let me know that they were on scene of a call with one of our people. And that's kind of how he put it at first. And then he said, JD, it's really bad. One of our firefighters had killed himself. And he was on scene still. His crews were on scene. And so I instantly went in my office, grabbed a couple of people that I knew I needed with me real quick to make some quick decisions. And so yeah, we had one of our firefighters, one of my best friends in the world, did family vacations with him and his family, wife and kids. He had been off on a back injury. A lot of the stuff we talked about, right? Been off on a back injury. He was a diehard guy on the USAR team, so all my USAR friends knew him as well. Super active, just most friendly, loving person you could ever imagine. And when I was told who it was, I just broke down. And but I knew I had a job to do, and I ended up going up to the scene. Took a couple people that were really close with me, and close with him. And we went up to the scene, and we ended up covering up with the flag, and his car was there, so I drove his car back to his family, and the family was at the house. Got one of my best friends to be the family liaison because I knew it was going to be really this person, Drew, that I asked to do it, is just such an amazing human being. I knew he could handle it, and I wasn't sure that I could at the time because I needed to focus on the organization. And I did not want a single person in our fire department to find out what had happened from anyone else other than us. So I did shift calls right away. So the first day we called the shift that was on duty, conference call, let them know right away. Then the next morning, a new shift came on, did a call with them. The next morning again, did a call with the next one. And totally unexpected, suffering the back injury. I had talked to him literally the day before. We had texted back and forth that night. Devastating. Absolutely devastating. It crushed our organization. I'm not sure I'm not there anymore. I don't believe it's recovered. I don't know if it ever will. These things have a much far more reaching impact than you could imagine. 7 and 10-year-old son, beautiful wife. I mean, you'd think he had it all, but that was our. So I will continue the discussion. I'll let you talk and then kind of answer what you got.
Well, I was just going to say that it breaks my heart, and I've had this conversation so many times. I don't think it can be repeated enough. When, 10, 15, 20 years, when we were talking about suicide, it was always the same thing. Oh, it's cowardly, how selfish, how could they? They left behind, this family, they left them all the pain. And then I start the podcast and I start listening to people exactly like, your brother, but thank God they're on the show because something stopped them. Something pulled them away. Or in some cases, they survived their attempt even. And I kept hearing the same thing over and over again. Of course, there's that element of, wanting the suffering to stop, the pain to stop, but it was also the sense of burdensome. And I realize as I'm still also talking to sleep scientists and, psychologists and all these other people, and understanding that there's a perfect storm of all these things that come together, unaddressed childhood trauma, sleep deprivation, injury, loss of identity, loss of purpose, organizational betrayal, whatever, that each person's perfect storm, to the point where the brain literally becomes miswired. And now they believe that they are a burden to the people that they love. And that arguably at that point, even though it's an element of psychosis, that makes their attempt courageous and selfless. Now it's completely wrong, in all the things that they're being led to believe in this broken mind, because to a healthy mind, it makes no sense. But this is what's so sad, is that you have someone, for example, I'm not making assumptions, but let's say they're already starting to struggle. And now this identity that they had as a strong firefighter and special operations and this proud dad who, I've had a back injury. Now you can't pick up your child, no matter go, pull someone out of a Haitian earthquake. Now a lot of who you are has been broken down as well. And these little whispers that I've heard so many people say of, well, if you just weren't here, your family would be better off. You can't even protect them anymore. You can't even serve your fire department anymore. And they're just picking at these people. And it's so, so sad, because if we put that front and center where people said, understood, if I start hearing these voices, that's when I need to pick up the phone. It's happening. It's beginning now. we would have saved so many people. And so in the shadows of so many that we've lost, we've got to start having these conversations. It's not about, hey, there's a phone number on the pin board. If you start struggling, call it. That doesn't work. EAP is like Russian roulette. I mean, I've heard it so many times. But when people start either hearing themselves say that, or you hear other people saying, I'm a piece of shit, God, and that real burden element, that is a huge red flag for us. But also, God forbid that you've lost someone, to understand that there's a high chance that might have been the scariest, toughest decision they made, but at that moment they thought they were doing the right thing. It reframes that whole cowardly cowardice, selfish thing that we keep putting shame upon shame when it comes to the people that we lose that way. But the only thing we can do after losing someone like this is to go, what did we do wrong? What are we missing? How can we change it? And again, it goes back to the beginning of our conversation with everything from organizational betrayal to, the identity piece to the sleep deprivation piece.
Yeah, 100%. I can remember this also. This also all was going down during COVID. When he was off duty during COVID, and I can remember we talk about little comments, right? That now stand out as much bigger, but it's important people hear it. But the first responders in Santa Clara County were offered the vaccinations first, right? So when the vaccines finally came out, they were offered them first. And actually in our county, they made it mandatory. And so I called him and said, hey, you're off. I can get you your vaccine. When you go, I need you to put your uniform on and go down there and go to the fairgrounds and get it. And his response back to that was, oh, good. I can put my uniform on and remember what it felt like to be a firefighter. It's burned into my brain. And I said, dude, shut up. Knock it off. You're still a firefighter. He tried to also resign from the USAR team. And I told him, no way. You're not resigning from the USAR team. Well, they need to fill my spot. I don't know when I'm coming. You're coming back. We're going to get you better. So yeah, just as red flags, and him and I had plenty of conversations, but not obviously to the depth. And I don't know if any conversation would have ever changed the outcome. You don't know, right? And probably wouldn't have. And because I completely agree with you, I do believe, and I know for a fact that he thought for sure they were going to be better off without him. That's what they thought. That's what his mind had truly convinced him of. And it is something that I watched the impact of even what it had on my own kids and on me personally, and where it took me and my mental health for a while, because we couldn't have his service right away because of COVID. There were no large gatherings allowed. So now we had to sit on that for well over 6 months before we could actually have a big department service. So at the same time during that, I was watching myself internally spiral while still trying to lead the organization, because there was no way that I was going to let this take me off duty while we hadn't even really honored him and his service. And I watched it with my own kids because they looked. I mean, my son and him were like so close. So close. My fishing, hunting, he took him duck hunting, fishing. I mean, my son just looked up to him so much. And then to watch, my daughter went out on there. My wife was amazing through it all. My daughter went out, and as soon as she turned 18, she wanted to get a tattoo. She wanted that tattoo bad. But I didn't know what it was till she came home, and my wife says, hey, you might want to just have a heads up on this. And it was actually in memory of him, and it had his number from work on it, and his radio number, and built into her tattoo. And my son's baseball cleats he custom ordered to have his number on the side of it. So it's like I watched what it did to my kids, and then also, but what it was really doing to me was I carried a tremendous amount of guilt. And that was really where I knew that I needed help, and I wasn't sure how to go about getting it. But I knew that I wasn't going to do it because I had unfinished business to do. So it wasn't until about a year later that I finally took those steps to start worrying about myself, after I felt like the organization and his family and everything else was in an okay place.
So where was the lowest place that you found yourself? And then let's start talking about some of the tools that you've used to navigate out of that.
Yeah, I mean, it was just pure, for me, it manifested itself just in a numbness. I couldn't focus at work. I'd stare at a computer screen and have a hell of a time just getting anything done. So I did file a PTSD claim. And when I did, I got sucked right into the work comp system with that. I did go back when I talked about EMDR earlier. I went back to Karen, and EMDR worked so well the first time. I thought it would work the second time. And unfortunately, it just didn't for this. I obviously needed something more. So I ended up getting a really good therapist who had a great first responder background, and she was awesome. And she really did help. They also put me on antidepressants, and that did not work for me. That I did not take those more than a week. I couldn't do it. It just the way they made me feel, I just didn't like the way any of it made me feel. So I was on a mission. I had to get back to work, so I did. And in 3 months, I went back to work. And it went okay at first. I talked about it with everybody. I shared my stories. I shared how I felt, all of those things. And then I had somebody I'm really close to, several months in, their wife called at 9:30 at night and said that they had a gun to their head and that they were threatening to kill themselves. And I jumped in my car. And my wife, I told her where I was going. I jumped in my car. I had a department car. I called a battalion chief who's my best friend and said, dude, we got a problem. He jumped in his battalion chief car, and we went code 3 to where this person lived, which was almost an hour away. And by the time we got there, on the phone on the way there, we got the family out. The family got the guns away. He was in crisis mode, obviously, so that person went to their house, and I went with the family. And I stood there in that parking lot, and his son was just crying. His daughter was being the strong one. She's a teenager, and the wife hysterical. So anyways, one thing I noticed throughout my career was I always would sacrifice my own health for others. And I share that because as a leader, I probably put myself through more pain than I needed to, and a lot of it was self-inflicted. In this case, I didn't know anybody else other than my own therapist that I thought could do some crisis intervention with the person. So I gave up my own therapy person that worked for me for this person right away. And so then now I did go talk to her one more time, but now there was this gigantic conflict because I knew she was talking to this person that it cared so much for me. It didn't feel right. So anyways, I kept working for about a month, and no joke, for that entire month or those 3 weeks, but when I would get up for work, I would throw up. I was physically ill to convince myself to show up in that office. And I had all of a sudden realized that every day I was afraid that somebody else was going to hurt themselves, that I was going to be responsible and not get there fast enough. I was something organizationally, a decision I made or a policy that wasn't in place was going to be my fault, and I was going to blame myself. I became super hyper vigilant with my kids. I was so worried for months and months after this. This is, and and to be honest, this hasn't gone away. It's much better and it's manageable, and I understand it now, but I still fear every day that someday my kids would have some traumatic, emotional something in their lives happen, and they would choose this route, right? It's like, so I was so afraid all the time that my kids were going to hurt themselves, or it was just awful. And so they put me in a program. Work comp put me in a program for 8 weeks. Every day I would go for 6 hours. And we did everything from art therapy to Tai Chi to talk therapy to every exercise every single day. And it just wasn't working. I still just wanted to go back to work. I thought that if I could get back to work, but I had a doctor through that in that program that said, I don't think you're going back to work, and I don't think you should. And I still didn't want to believe it. And that's when I got introduced after that program, or actually during that program was when I got introduced or recommended that, hey, maybe you want to reach out to the SIREN Project. I'm going to send you some information. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know who was involved in it. And I just knew that, and I'm about as straight-laced as it comes, no drug use, no anything. I didn't know, and I was nervous. I was afraid of it. I didn't think I would ever do it. Well, I made the phone call. And when I made the phone call, or I sent in an email through their site, I got a phone call back. And when the phone rang, it said Tim Howling. Like, Tim, what's Tim calling me for? I wonder what's going on with USAR, because Tim and I were on the USAR team together. And he says, hey, thanks for filling out that form on our site. I think we can help you. And that was how I ended up at SIREN. And yeah, that's kind of my story with the mental health struggles. But it was a tough go. And honestly, like, I couldn't be more blessed to have found them, and I couldn't be more thankful now looking back, and grateful that we all have always joked, man, I wish I could retire at earlier than 50 or whatever. Well, you know what? I did, and it may not have been the way that I thought I was going to end up retiring, and I retired at 48, but man, am I thankful for these extra years that I've got where I'm healthier, I'm happier, I'm going all over the country watching my son fish. He just graduated Auburn University in Alabama. He's a professional bass fisherman now. My daughter, I get to see her as much as I want. She's at San Francisco State. My wife and I get to travel all over the world now, and I'm just so I can take it all in. I think I lived in such a blank state for so long in my head just to get by and to make sure that I was doing everything I could for everybody else, that I missed so many moments. Even though I was there, I wasn't there.
I know integration is a big part. So kind of walk me through the lead up to your experience. And then if you want to give an overview of the psychedelic therapy that you went through, and then let's talk about the integration after as well.
Sure. Yeah. So leading up to it, you couldn't, they make sure that they want you to eat clean, get sugars, caffeine, get them all out of your system. You need to, you start journaling a little bit. And the other piece that was, you can't be on any antidepressants, and you need to stop drinking. And I definitely enjoyed my wine at night. That was a big part of the integration, and we did phone calls or FaceTime calls leading up to it, kind of setting the expectations. And I was a nervous wreck. I share with other groups of people now that go, before they go, I'll talk to them in the beginning and say, hey, I looked for every excuse to say I couldn't go. And the best thing I ever did was I got on that plane. I was looking for ways out, even leading up to it, hoping there'd be traffic or something that I'd miss. And so then once I got there, get to Puerto Vallarta, meet up with everybody, I realized, before we left, I realized that there was another person from the USAR team that I knew really well that was also going. I had no idea they were struggling. I had none. This is a person I worked alongside of. I'd been deployed with all over the country for for USAR. I had no idea that they were struggling also. We have very similar backgrounds in sports and just our work histories. And so it was, but that also made me nervous, right? Now somebody I'm going to go through this thing that I'm already afraid of is going to be there, and I know them. And it made me a little nervous at first that it was Tim, and I knew Tim, and I had never met Angela, but Angela ended up going on our retreat with us. And so we had my journey through that was very tough, to be honest. We during our psilocybin ceremony, I took the drink concoction with the mushrooms in it, and at first things were good. I remember it's very clear. I can tell you every single thing that happened, but I could not tell at that time in the moment what was real and what was not real. And they tell you, don't go into it with expectations of what you think is going to happen. You got to just let the medicine do what it does. And I honestly, in my head, thought, oh, it's going to be all these calls, all these dead babies that I've seen and these kids and all these things that I had gone through with EMDR. And honestly, it had nothing to do with that other than there was the suicide piece, but it was about him. It wasn't about the trauma of any of it. Every single thing so then all of a sudden the Dr. Andrea came over to me, and I was sitting up on the bed outside on my cot, and she says, "Why don't you come over and put your feet in the pool?" So I did. Man, things are bright. It's very but this is probably 4 or 5 hours in, and I'm really going through all this. And I see that person I was telling you about from the USAR team laying on the ground on the other side, just laying there. But I didn't know it was him. I honestly saw myself. I saw myself. And all of a sudden he got up, came towards me. I got up out of the pool, and we were standing there kind of facing each other. And in my mind, I was talking and looking at myself. But he has tattoos on his arms, and I was looking, going, man, why did I get these tattoos? What do they mean? What do they mean? What is this medicine trying to tell me? And anyways, he says, what are we supposed to do? And I don't know. Are we supposed to fight? And I'm like, now all of a sudden I went into, I'm going to fight myself, and it got no good for me. We ended up, they have people there, but somebody gets in between us, and I can remember all this vividly. And the whole time I'm thinking, no, I have to deal with this. I have to handle it. I've got to get this out with myself. And then anyways, that ends, and I turn and I look, and I just share all this because it's really important for me to reflect on it also. But I turn and I look, and there's an empty chair, and that empty chair represented the person that I lost at the suicide at work. And I had never grieved. I had never, ever been able to grieve that. And man, it all came out. I mean, just intense sobbing. And I remember almost like vomiting. And it was like I finally was able to let it all out. And there was a couple other occasions like that. And then there was another lady that was part of the retreat also, and she was having a rough go. And for some reason, I thought it was, and somebody was over there trying to help her, and I thought it was in my head, it was a representation of my wife. And my wife's battled Crohn's for many years, and the medicines and the trying to feel better and always in pain. And anyways, I thought the people over there were causing it or something. So I went over there and said, get away from her. And next thing you know, I'm face down in the dirt from the person that is there to, protect us. And I'm literally being held down in the grass. And finally, the medicine man was right there, and he's talking to me, and it just all of a sudden cleared out. I was like, what am I doing? I literally walked over, I got my picture of my family, sat back down on my bed, stared at it, and was like, that was the only thing that made me feel at peace. After it was all over and I went back up, I felt like I didn't know what had happened. I thought I made a huge mistake. What just happened? I made a huge mistake. And then the next day, I struggled with it all night. what just happened? And then the next day when we did the 5-MeO DMT, the toad, it's a very fast acting, right? Fast acting, and doesn't last that long. But when that happened and I laid back, it was the most clear I had ever seen things. It was like, it made me realize, like, all I've done is sacrifice my own health and my own goodwill for all of these things at work. And what did it get me? It got me in a retreat. It got me face down in the dirt. And in my life, it took an emotional toll on my health. I've been taking blood pressure medicine since I was 30 years old because I carried it all the time. I had been so worried. I would be on vacations taking phone calls, right? Every single where I went as a union president or as a deputy chief of ops, it was following me. And I came up out of that. I felt nothing except I was with my wife, and it was her and I's time to move on and to enjoy the life and I could finally say it was okay to stop being in the fire service. And that's where it got me. And I came away feeling so much better after it was all over. But at first I thought, oh no, what did I do? What did I do? Did I make a mistake? And then that integration afterwards, the gratitude, they talk about the gratitude. And that was probably my biggest takeaway, was just flipping everything from being a negative to go, man, how lucky am I today? How lucky am I, even what I said earlier, how lucky am I to be done at 48 years old and have these extra years that I wouldn't have had? I'd have been running Super Bowl, the last Super Bowl that just happened. I got the World Cup coming up. I'd have been so immersed in all of that. And yet, what am I doing? This morning before you and I talked, I was on my bass boat out there, and I already caught 5 fish today, and I'm going out when we're done again. Right? How lucky am I to be able to have that life? My wife right now and my daughter are in Europe and traveling over her break. And I just got back from a bass tournament with my son. These are things that I wouldn't have had an opportunity to do had I not got to this point. And I got there because of the SIREN Project and what they offered to first responders, to people that didn't even know it was available, and to somebody like me. And I'm now on the board and super grateful and want to give back as much as I can and lead other people that it could benefit like it did me if I get the opportunity.
It's amazing hearing these testimonies. I've got a friend, Navy SEAL friend, who just went on one, I think about 3 weeks ago, through a different group, but same thing. It's life-changing. And again, it's not the right fit for every single person. I had Dr. Andrea on the show a few weeks ago. It was amazing listening to her, but just knowing that this is in the toolbox. It might just be equine therapy that works. It might be canine therapy like Tim. It might be so many things, or a combination of. But if all people think is available is, psych meds and talk therapy, and then possibly EMDR, that conversation's got out there now, then that's such a narrow field. And even EMDR, it seems, again, just observationally from all the stories, that it's a great tool maybe for specific acute events, but not for that cumulative trauma. You do need something else for that. But, you've got these first responders, they go to the through EAP, they sit in front of the wrong person. The person bursts into tears. They're like, well, I am a piece of shit. I guess I'm done. Not understanding that, firstly, in the counseling world, you just haven't found the right counselor. But then over and above that, there's so many other options. And we need to make sure that our first responders know that they can go overseas legally, through these nonprofits, and get the treatment that will truly change, if not save, their lives.
Yeah. I think you're right. It is a tool, right? I'm super proud of, like, even our local union. You talk about, they all have suffered the same thing I went through, with this, and they started up an organization, Tee It Up for Mental Health, and they're out there, and the SIREN Project is part of one of their beneficiaries this year. They do a big golf tournament every year, raise a bunch of money, but then there's the Runstone Ranch, and there's these other things. They're diversifying, right? So that they're spreading this money out that they raise every year to a bunch of different avenues, because they know, like, we just want our money to go towards an option that might work for somebody, and there needs to be more. It's not just one fits all So I'm proud of them for taking that step too. So.
One question, because it's interesting, so many people, this kind of circles around to the ACEs earlier, so many people that I know that have gone through, whether it's the MDMA or whether it's, ayahuasca, is they go in thinking, well, it's going to be the cause, just like you alluded to. But more often than not, a lot of times it's what happened when they were young, the early life element. Did you have any kind of, aha moments when it came to that part of your life?
I didn't, but again, I didn't have anything from that. But I've also been in the fire service almost my entire life, my entire adult life since I was 18. So it's like I didn't have anything from the childhood, but I definitely it was just all of those other people in my life and a reflection of myself. But yeah, I didn't have that. What a lot of people did, but the people that I was with certainly did. I watched that, things they didn't even know came out in that.
Yeah, I use the princess and the pea analogy a lot these days. If you don't get to that pea, if you don't know what's under all those mattresses, then you can do the psych meds and the counseling sessions. But if you're not able to access it because your mind has locked it down, then, it's going to be frustrating. It's going to be maddening. And this is what seems to be the real superpower of these medicines, is they're just showing you what that nucleus of that problem really is, whether it's, the cumulative trauma and then, the shame and guilt associated, even though wrongly, with losing one of your firefighters, or whether it was your creepy uncle when you were 7, whatever these things are, it's opening the door. And then, as we talked about with the integration, now you can go back to a trusted, culturally competent clinician and start unpacking that with them. And now you're amplifying the healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree.
Well, I want to be mindful of your time. We've been chatting over 2 hours. I could talk to you for hours more, but I want to throw some quick closing questions at you before I let you go. The first one I love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
My kids would laugh. They'd say, "What? You read a book?" One book that did that stood out to me. We did a lot of leadership type stuff in the fire department, but it was Tribes by Godin. That was a good one for me because I didn't really. I always knew the sense and the importance of having a community in that, but I think there's a lot of value in that read. At least there was for me. Then the other one, but it's a little bit different. That I wrote down was there's a book called The Allure of Toxic Leaders by Lipman Blumen, but every fire department has them, right? And it basically talks about why people are drawn to leadership sometimes that is toxic. And in the fire service, I've seen that firsthand. You coming up in the fire service, there were some battalion chiefs that you were like, man, from just they put on this big giant show that they're this tough guy and that they're going to take care of their people, and people are just drawn to it. But at the end of the day, it's actually the most toxic thing the organization can have. And it divides us it divides our shifts, and it divides our, it makes it hard to make change because they're so if they come out and say something, people follow them, whether it's right or it's wrong. And so that book I really tried to take away from it, just how to break that down a little bit. That was one that was good for me. But and then that's it. Right now, I'd read as many travel books as I can because I want to travel the country with my wife, and we've been fortunate to travel a whole bunch as we raised our kids. But I want to find the next cool place to go to that her and I can enjoy in retirement.
Love it. What about films, television, documentaries? Any of those that you love?
Oh man, I don't watch a ton of that. I would say I'm an avid sports fan. So if there's sports on TV, that's what I'm watching. And I am so happy that opening day of baseball started yesterday.
All right. Well, the next question, is there a person that you'd recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
Yeah, I've got a few. I mentioned him earlier, and we haven't stayed that close, but he made a tremendous impact on me. And that was, his name is Alec, Alec, Otten, Oughton. And he was a classmate of mine in the Executive Fire Officer program, and he's currently the fire chief at Aurora Fire in Colorado, and he was the fire chief with Henrico County, Virginia before that. I'm sure you've experienced it. You sit in a room with people from all over the country, and I'm sure you've interviewed them, and for some reason you magically connect and you look up to them instantly from when you listen to them talk. Well, Alec was like that for me in our Executive Fire Officer program. He had lived through some personal tragedy, losing a child, and for him to openly share that when we would sit and talk, he shared some of that. And then I knew that his organization had, like, his leadership style, he's so good with people, but I knew that they had also suffered some line of duty suicides. So I reached out to him immediately after ours, and man, it was so helpful what he shared. And I'll never forget one of the things he said, JD, you got to be ready for this. And I'm like, what now? You know, like, what else can happen? And he's like, when this is all settling down, the finger pointing is going to start. And you need to be ready, because they're going to blame people. They're going to blame you. They're going to blame anything they can. And you can't not take that personal. It's because they're hurting, they're grieving, they don't know how to process it. And honestly, if I hadn't got that advice, I don't know, I might have just quit. I literally might have just quit, because I watched it, and it sure as shit happened. And some of my best friends, you know, start pointing fingers, and it might not even be about that. It's about other things, right? And it's just like, it was devastating, but I knew it's just all part of pain and not knowing how to deal with the emotions. But I was so thankful for that piece of advice when he gave it. I think that and he has no idea about, I've done SIREN Project, nothing, but there's a level of great, he's just a great human being. I think that would be some great conversations and life that I think would add to your show.
Yeah, well, I'd love to get him on.
The other one is Carl Custon he's from the USAR team. Carl has been a mentor of mine from early on in my career. He owns a company called Lee and Associates now. He's a retired battalion chief out of the Peninsula area there in the San Mateo area, but he's also like a world-renowned USAR guy, and he deploys on the teams, on the incident support teams that go all over to all these big incidents. He's always stayed operational. He was super close with our firefighter who killed himself, and also with me. And I was on the scene still. Up there. And he called because he had heard about it. And just his friendship and everything that he brings, and his perspective on life and people, he would be another great one to add. Also, you know, another thing that I'll just share in case somebody out there is listening and has to go through this. It's hard to say because you don't want people to get mad at you, but when we were up there at that scene, I'd never really been on the other side, being like the family member, right? And I know this goes without saying, but I felt like the brother, right, that had just lost or the best friend who just lost his best friend, you know, and I was. But there were somebody up there that they were talking and laughing a little bit with the sheriff's officers, and conversation completely unrelated, right? But they didn't have the connection that I did. And that made me so angry that, and they were somebody in our department, but they didn't have that connection to him. And and a leader in our department. And but I remember them chuckling, and I remember getting so pissed off. And then I, later had time to reflect back and go, wow, we like to diffuse our stress on scene sometimes when we're getting back on the rig. And there's probably been many of times where I may have done something similar, and I felt really bad about that after having lived it on the other side. So anybody out there listening to understand the impact that actually has, I lived it. And I just want to make sure that people, are aware of that and do what you need to when you get back to the firehouse. But if there's anybody within earshot, you don't know how that impacts them. And it had a pretty devastating impact on me.
Absolutely right. And you're right, because there is that nervous energy that we do end up leaning into humor. And it's the same kind of thing that I've seen a lot with social media. You get these crews to take a picture in front of someone's burnt out home with, cheesy grins on their face, leaning on their pipe poles, disregarding the fact that that's someone's home. That's their entire world. That could be, even if it wasn't a fatal fire, like everything that they loved is gone now. The pictures on the fridge and, memories that were maybe boxed in the attic. And you're using that as a vanity piece to let everyone know what a hero you are. There's absolutely use PIO and, news pictures, or take a picture, after the event where it's not showing that. But again, we've got to understand that these are people's lives, whether it's us on scene. And again, I'm sure I've been exactly what you said. I've probably done the same thing and, come across as insensitive on a scene if I was trying to, release some stress, what I thought was out of earshot. But there is that kind of detachment where we forget that, that's someone's loved one, that's someone's home, whatever it was. And we're driven into the ground and we're tired and we just want to release, or just want to, snap a picture for crew pride. But we've got to understand to take a step back and go, but wait a second, let's look at the bigger picture.
Yep. Inside an organization from an official standpoint, but I will speak directly to the union leaders out there that this is where you get an opportunity to guide your people that you see are in desperate need of something different. And the resources are there available. They are available. Contact the SIREN Project. Have the open mind to understand that it might not be for you, and you may not need it, but it is an option, and it is very beneficial. And for everybody that knows me, I think you would have never in the world thought that that's where I would have went. And I did, and I had the courage to do it for myself, and now I'm going to make sure that I have the courage to speak up so that others know it's available.
Beautiful. Well, the last question before we make sure everyone knows where to find you and the SIREN Project. What do you do to decompress?
I fish. I'm an avid outdoors person. I love being outdoors, but I live right here on the water, and I started I've been bass fishing for a long time, but I love to bass fish. I love to be on the water, get up early. I love to watch the sunrise. And when things are bugging me, and my wife always jokes, like she's literally bought me little notebooks. I love to write down my thoughts. It helps me to put it down on paper. And then when I read it, sometimes it can be in your head all you want, but when you put it down on paper and you look at it and you reread it and you realize it's really probably not that big of a deal. At least it works for me. And I've really, really worked hard on reframing my overall perspective on how I view things. I think my wife and family would tell you I'd really good at saying a lot of negative things out loud for a long time in my life, and I've really tried to swing that and be appreciative and grateful for the things that we have and the opportunities that we get. And I think those are the most important things for me.
Absolutely. Well, for people listening then, firstly, if they want to reach out to you or learn more about you, where are the best places online to do that?
I'm on Facebook and on Instagram, both J.D. Madden, both of those. I think I'd be pretty easy to find through there, or shoot me a message. And then, anybody that is looking for help out there, or even just wants to talk about options, feel free to reach out.
And the SIREN Project, is that sirenproject.org? I'm trying to remember now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
SIRENProject.org. Yep.
Okay. Brilliant. Well, I want to thank you so much. It's just been amazing. Like you said, I've had Angela on, I've had Tim on, I've had Dr. Andrea recently, and then now you as well. But to have a voice that was in, a deputy fire chief position who is talking about this and having, again, the courageous vulnerability to talk about their own struggles and how this, for you personally, was one of the most important tools in the toolbox. It's been an amazing conversation. So I want to thank you so, so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks, James. You're doing great stuff, and I know it's making a difference.